Hello and welcome to Pictorial Planet. My name's John Finch. Today I'm at Ballandalloch Castle in the Highlands of Scotland, and I'll be photographing the castle with my SL66 and Ilford FP4 film. What I want is to compare Geoffrey Crawley's two developers, his two first solvent developers, his FX3 and his FX4. Now, we looked at his FX3 developer a couple of weeks ago, and I was quite surprised at just how good it is. It's a really fine developer. Did his FX4 developer improve upon that? If you'll remember, the FX3 developer was a Fenidone version of a more common developer, Adox MQ Borax. And his FX4 developer is his own formula. It's a different formula, and let's see if it improves or not upon the FX3. So the lighting's interesting today. I'm under about 80% cloud cover, so I'm going to have to wait a little while for the sunshine to come out. In fact, I can feel it starting to break through a little bit now. An interesting point about meter reading is if you're under the shadow of a cloud, and I mean a full cloud, not a watery cloud, but a full cloud, and if you're under the shadow of that cloud and you take a meter reading, then you're actually taking a shadow meter reading, and you can close down 2 stops from that meter reading. And then when the sun does come out, your exposure will be correct. So I can take my meter reading and close down 2 stops, although you may be able to see it's a bit of a milky cloud at the moment, so I'm getting a little bit of sunlight through, so that tip doesn't work right this moment in time. But I thought I'd mention that because it's something that I do quite often. I'm photographing the architecture up here above the front door of the castle, and one thing I want to get right is my exposure. Now, this is a good example of zone exposure, where you're placing an object or a thing in your photograph into a specific zone. And I want some brightness to this image because it's a little bit it's a little bit dull. And if I just took a straight meter reading, a lot of the walls will be just plain grey. So I'm taking a spot meter reading of the sunlit part of the wall, and I've raised that up to zone 7. So I'm expecting that to be bright in the photograph and the other shades of grey to fall off as it goes down the scale. For instance, that conical structure there is much lower than the bright lit sun wall, so it's going to come down to zone 4, maybe zone 5, and then there's a few shadows. So that's me placing a specific part of my image in a specific zone to get an effect that I want. Before I start developing this film with this FX4, let's just talk about the developer and what Crawley is trying to achieve with this developer. The formula for FX4 is a pretty straightforward sulfite solvent developer, but there's a couple of little interesting points that Crawley's making here. So one of the notable features about this formula is the fact that Crawley uses 3 developing agents. He has the metol, he has hydroquinone, and he has phenidone. So he has these three developing components. Now, we can immediately talk about the hydroquinone because the borax keeps the alkalinity relatively low, and so the hydroquinone isn't really activated as a developing agent. It's more of a supporting role in that it regenerates both metol and phenidone. So that's what it's doing. Otherwise, the metol and phenidone would oxidize and stop working. So the hydroquinone is very good at regenerating those two developing agents. But why did Crawley use metol and phenidone together in this developer? Well, let's just back up a moment here. We looked at FX3 a couple of weeks ago, and we saw that that was a phenidone-based developer. It was the ADOX Borax MQ developer turned into a phenidone form and rebalanced. And in fact, I decided after testing it thoroughly, it's actually a little bit better than the ADOX developer. And I liked it a lot. So he could have chosen phenidone for this developer, couldn't he? But what Crawley believed was that phenidone could run away with the highlights very easily. And he believed that metol was a better developer for highlights. And so he's balanced this developer in such a way as to use phenidone for the shadows and metol for the highlights. Now, of course, we all know phenidone is still going to be developing some highlights as well as the metol, and the metol will still be developing some of the shadows. But the way he's balanced it is attempting to give more weight to the phenidone development of shadows and more weight to the highlights development with the metol. Now, other companies that made developers thought this was, well, they thought it wasn't necessary. They believed you didn't need to use these two developing agents together like this. But Crawley stuck with this idea with other developers as well, as we will see. And in fact, in a later developer that we will cover on this channel, FX15, he perfected the balance of these two developing agents and created an excellent solvent developer. This was the stepping stone towards FX15. So he was already trialing this idea he had of these two developing agents. So that's important to understand about FX4. It's quite different. It's very Crawley, and now we know a bit more of the background of what he's trying to do. So what else is going on here? Well, he has the sodium sulfite, and this time, instead of FX3, where he had reduced it to 75 grams, he kept it at that D76 type solvent developer, 100 grams per litre. So he wanted fine grain, that's definite here, and was believing that he could increase the sharpness through the balance of these different developing agents, the amount of alkalinity, and a little spot of potassium bromide. Which, by the way, potassium bromide is used to assist in sharpening up developers. So he's put a little bit in there, probably to reduce the fog levels, but also to add a little bit more sharpness to the final result on the negative. The borax level is the normal kind of level used in a D76 type developer, around about 2.5 grams. So that's the makeup of the developer. If it's used at full strength, it has a good capacity of 10 to 12 films. And you just have to increase the development time by 5% after the second and subsequent films. This developer formula that I'm showing you here was his original. This was the first one that he released in 1960 or 61. And he stuck with it pretty much. Sometimes it's been reported that he used 6 grams of hydroquinone in the formula, and some believe that was a typo and not a change in this developing formula. He had no reason to change the developer formula because he had better developers anyway later on. So in my opinion, it's more likely that this was his original and the correct FX4 developer formula. And it works pretty well. Let's have a look at some scans I made of the negatives I developed. This first photograph is of the entrance to the castle, and as you can see, the two developers are definitely giving different speeds. The one on the left hand side is the FX3, and the FX3 is giving a better film speed than the FX4. Look at the doorway, and you can see how on the left we can see the inner door, and on the right it's barely visible. In fact, you may not on the video be able to see it at all. So there's a big difference in film speed, and I've found this before with FX4. Crawley claimed it gave a speed increase on box, but I've always found it's given a decrease, and I usually run FX4 through at half box speed, actually the same as D76. On the left hand side, the FX3, well, that definitely gives an increase in speed and runs FX4 at 160 EI. So if you're after an increase in speed, FX3 is the one to go for. But also look at the contrast. There is a definite increase in contrast with the FX4, and that is actually very pleasant. If we zoom in, there we are. Now you can see now the same area of the picture. On the left hand side, the grain is finer with the FX3, which is surprising, isn't it? Because we would have expected the FX4 on the right to have a finer grain, but it actually hasn't, at least not in my experience here. But it's sharper. It's very slightly sharper, the FX4. There's more acutance. Now, Crawley was trying to increase the sharpness a little bit without using a reduction in sulfite, and I think he has achieved that. Not a lot, but enough to make a sharper and more contrasty looking negative. Very interesting there. Let's look at another of the pictures. Again, this is a scan. On the left hand side we have FX3, on the right hand side FX4. They're quite similar, but again on the right you can see a little more contrast in the FX4 negative. And look at the sky. There's a little more compensation in the FX4 as well. Is this the metol doing the job that Crawley was trying to do? Because he wanted to use metol for his highlights to give more compensation and more control, not let them run away, and I think he's achieved that. Very slightly, but it's there. The sharpness is about the same, maybe a little sharper on the right hand side. The FX4 yet again has pipped FX3 at the post with sharpness. And as I look at these photographs, I do like the FX4 a little bit better. The FX3 by itself, a couple of weeks ago, it's a very good developer. There's no doubt about it. And if you need a little extra speed, that's the one to go for. But the FX4 is giving me a little more contrast, a little more interesting nuances in the tonality, and a little more sharpness, so more impact from the negative. Let's look at one more. Again, we have FX3 on the left, FX4 on the right hand side. These were both taken within a minute of each other, because what I was doing was swapping the back on the camera with every shot. And again, you can see the sky. There's more compensation with the FX4. The sky's a little darker. The clouds are standing out a little more. Quite pleasant. And the tonality in the stonework of the castle is a little more pleasant too with the FX4. So really it's giving me better tonality at the end of the day. That's what I'm seeing. Let's just check out the sharpness. The FX3 on the left, FX4 on the right. You can see there is more detail in these flower pots on the right hand side. there is a little more sharpness. I'm looking at the doorway. Yep, a little bit more sharpness, not a lot. It's not a great deal. You know, in a print, you probably wouldn't see the difference, frankly. You can tell this shadow's a little darker again on the FX4 than the FX3, just showing a little less film speed from the FX4. Yeah, more shadow here because of that lack of film speed. But when I say lack, we're talking box or maybe a third under box. Really, I do generally use FX4 at about a stop or 2/3 of a stop less than box to get what I think are the best results from it. But I wanted a very fair comparison here between the two developers. All right, you know what I'll do? I'm going to do a print now and show you the grain enlarged in a print. Let's have a look at the print. It's 11 inches square and it's a fine print. It's got nice contrast, rich dark shadows over here and lovely highlights on the castle, and the whites, they zing. There's really nice contrast throughout. The sky is well compensated. I haven't used any filters when I took this photograph, and I haven't dodged or burned it at all, so I'm very pleased with it. FX4, it's a good developer. I'm not sure whether it's better than FX3 or not. They're very similar. I think the compensation factor is the difference here. It's compensating well. The sharpness is similar. FX2 I liked more, but we know there's a better solvent developer coming up in a later video. But next week we're going to be looking at Crawley's fine grain developer FX5. So why not watch that? Please thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and why not become a patron? I want to thank all my patrons for supporting this channel and bringing it to everyone on the internet. Thank you all, and bye for now.